Good evening, you're watching Brass Tacks. I'm Zaka Jacob. In the next few hours, we will know if India and the United States have managed to clinch a trade deal, even if it is a limited one. At 9:30 p.m. India time, Trump will start signing letters to countries, both to those countries with whom the US has managed to clinch a deal so far, and also to the ones that he has not managed to hammer out a deal with yet. He will be intimating these countries in the first tranche, about a dozen odd countries, about the tariffs which will take effect from the 1st of August. The big question is, will India be able to crack a deal with Donald Trump? If not, if this deal doesn't come through, then what kind of tariffs is India looking at? Is it looking at a 26% tariff? Now, Trump is also threatening another additional 10% for all BRICS countries, and India is the I in BRICS. So does that mean that India will have to now look at 36% tariffs for all exports into the United States? What are the red lines for India, particularly when it comes to agricultural produce? And surprisingly, why are the markets still holding steady if starting the 1st of August, which is 3 weeks from now, India will have to shell out a third in tariffs, and vice versa? If India decides to go with reciprocal tariffs on American goods, then American goods will also start getting charged at a third of their cost. So the question is, why then are the markets factoring this fear in?
Sending letters out on Monday having to do with the trade deals. It could be 12, maybe 15. You know, Secretary of Commerce right here. And I guess, Howard, I would say it could be maybe as many as 15 or so. And they'll be going out on Monday, and some will go out on Tuesday and Wednesday, and we've made deals also. So we're going to have a combination of letters, and some deals have been made.
So India currently is subject to what is called a 10% tariff, baseline tariff on select goods. If no agreement is reached, then there will be what is called the reciprocal tariff, which Trump announced on the 2nd of April and then put on a pause for a 90-day period starting April 9th. That, of course, expires on the 9th of July, which is later this week. So the reciprocal tariff for India was 16%. And then now you have this whole new threat that Trump has added, which is another 10% for all BRICS-aligned countries, including those members who are part of BRICS. So what that means is, if he goes through with what he calls these anti-American BRICS policies, if he goes through with the total gamut of tariffs for Indian goods, that could push India's tariff burden for all exports into the United States to 36%. So basically, Indian companies will have to factor in an extra third of their cost of manufacturing, or at least the price of manufacturing, into the export goods that they're planning to send to the United States. But India has a plan in place if at all this deal is not reached, and there is a 50-50 chance that a deal could likely not be reached before that deadline of 9th of July. Diversifying the markets is one way to try and offset this possible tariff burden. The government has also asked exporters and manufacturers to look at other emerging as well as advanced markets. India has, remember, tied up a deal with the UK, an FTA with the UK, which could likely get signed by the end of this month when the Prime Minister is expected to visit London. More SEZs are expected to be set up, expanded to boost further exports. Indian producers are finding newer and newer markets, particularly for toys and fruits. Made in India toys are now being exported to over 150 countries. Fruits, whether it's lychees from Pathankot being exported to Qatar, jamun, mango, cherries and oranges are being exported to West Asia. Recently, there was also a National Skill Olympiad, which was held to try and boost seafood exports and promote value addition within that particular industry. Now, last week, after the Indian negotiating team, headed by the Commerce Secretary Rajesh Agarwal, returned from the United States, this is what the Commerce Minister had to say, that India cannot be forced into a timeline of another country. India will arrive at a deal in India's interest in its own time and pace.
मैंने आपको कई बार बताया कि भारत अपने शर्तों पर चर्चा करता है, अलग अलग देशों के साथ चर्चा चल रही है। फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट तभी संभव होता है जब दो तरफा फायदा हो। इट शुड बी अ विन विन एग्रीमेंट, और जब भारत के इंटरेस्ट को सुरक्षित रखते हुए नेशनल इंटरेस्ट विल ऑलवेज बी सुप्रीम, वो ध्यान में रखते हुए अच्छा अगर डील बनती है तो भारत तो विकसित देशों के साथ डील करने के लिए कभी भी तैयार है.
So let's look at what the sticking points are, because at the end of the day, India and America are strategic partners. Why can't both countries find a common ground for this sticky issue of trade? 4 rounds of negotiations have taken place so far between India and the United States. There are some sticking points. Chief among them, the main contention is around the entry of American genetically modified crops, particularly soybean and maize, which the Trump administration wants India to import. India has so far drawn a line at that. That is a red line for India. Here's a quick explainer as to why India is opposed to genetically modified crops, which America wants India to loosen up on. So the contentious point is about genetically modified crops. The United States wants India to allow the import of GM crops, specifically soybean and maize, and that is a big concern in India. There are fears that GM crops could lead to genetic contamination of indigenous varieties. It could reduce genetic diversity. It could also threaten local ecosystems. Many farmer groups are opposed to GM crops because of concerns that seed patents and corporate control, particularly by foreign biotech giants, could make farmers much more dependent on those foreign seeds as opposed to domestically grown ones. It would also invite dominance by global agro-trading giants, and it would push out domestic processors. In fact, according to GTRI, one of the leading think tanks on international trade here in India, India risks losing its export competitiveness in the European market if it allows genetically modified animal feed imports from the US under this trade deal. If India does allow the entry, it could damage India's image as a GMO-free supplier in sensitive segments like rice and tea, honey, spices, even organic foods. Now, there are fears, like I said, of genetic contamination, forced navigation around. Now, except for cotton, no other genetically modified crop is allowed to be cultivated in India. Now, experts believe that in such a scenario, the question of importing genetically modified soybean or genetically modified corn or maize from the United States for food purposes simply does not arise. In fact, the only crop that is allowed genetically modified to be imported into India was BT cotton. It was approved in 2002. Originally, it was developed by a controversial company called Monsanto. Later, Monsanto got acquired by Bayer. That collaboration happened with another company called Mahico. So for the last 20-odd years, initially what was seen was BT cotton has some inbuilt resistance to bollworm. That's a major cotton pest, particularly in the Vidarbha and other parts of India where cotton is grown. As of date, over 90% of the cotton that's grown in India is BT cotton. But it has shown mixed results. Initially, it led to higher yields and reduced pesticide use. But over time, what has happened is secondary pests started developing some kind of a build-up resistance, and that has undermined some of the benefits that we've seen initially with the use of BT cotton. Also, controversially, farmer suicides in cotton belts like Vidarbha have been controversially linked to the use of BT cotton, particularly in the last 20-odd years. So, under this trade deal, the United States is basically telling India that it wants an entry for genetically modified soybean and corn. Now, India currently doesn't import any genetically modified crops. Like I said, there's only BT cotton that's been allowed so far. Neither soybean nor corn are approved for cultivation or to be imported as food. The only exception that was made, and this happened a few years ago when there was a shortage of processed oils, refined oils, genetically modified canola and GM modified soybean are allowed only for oil processing, for oil refining to make processed oil here in India. America wants this deregulated for food imports, and that is something that India is loath to conceding. We'll go across to Sanjay Suri, who's joining us. So, Sanjay, we're counting down. Maybe in an hour and a half, we'll know whether or not that limited trade deal between India and the United States will come through. Trump has said that to 12 countries he'll be signing letters. Some of them deals will be announced. Some others tariff rates will be announced. What are you picking up in terms of the latest? Because the language from both sides, at least in the last few days over the weekend, etc., has seemingly hardened a bit.
Well, we've had Scott Bessent saying that now we are very close to a deal. But the fact is that if we are talking of the end of the 90-day period, there were 56 countries on that sort of 90-day list. and we've had almost nothing with any country so far. There's been a limited deal with Britain, a deal with Vietnam a couple of days back. That's very iffy by the sound of it. 20% tariff for Vietnamese exports and imports from the US completely duty-free. That's not a model many countries can follow, certainly not India. So with all the others, all this is still hanging as it is with India. And we have had that July 9th deadline now extended till the 1st of August. In effect, we've had that word from Howard Lutnick, the US Commerce Secretary. So the issue with the deal with India certainly is going down to the wire, as it is with many countries. And the difficulty is not just demands that are arising within the negotiations, and those are absolute demands. The US wants everything on its own terms, certainly under Trump. He has said that he wants to open up India, nothing less than that. But there are other factors that have arisen, like the statement that any country that is taking the BRICS approach that is perceived as anti-American will have another 10%. So there is now that reminder really of a danger that's always hovered above these talks. What if you agree a deal with the US, everything is signed on the dotted line and everything is in place? Suddenly Trump says, okay, I didn't like what you said, another 10%. So there is that question that is hanging over this, and that adds to a continuing problem with the US over compliance and certification. Whenever there's a dispute, who decides? Certainly we can forget about WTO.
All right.
The US position has been that it will decide. It will be what it says it is. So that is also a continuing concern, how this is going to be regulated and implemented, whatever is agreed.
All right, Sanjay, we'll leave it at that. I guess, there's a little bit of geopolitics happening here as well. So the deal with the US may or may not come through, but the Prime Minister is firming up plans to visit London later this month, where the India-UK FTA could be signed by both sides. They'd agreed to that a few weeks ago. Whether or not the dates will come through, we'll have to wait and see. But I think India is also trying to send out a signal that, look, the United States is not the only advanced market out there that we're interested in doing business with, or that we're dependent on. We're looking at other markets as well. All right, so what can one expect if a deal were to go through between India and the United States, even if it's a limited trade deal, and what if one does not come through? I'm now joined by veteran market expert, investor, startup mentor, Mr. Ajay Bagga. Thank you very much, Mr. Bagga, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Let's deal with the worst case scenario. We will know in the next few hours whether there is a deal or not. What if there is no deal? How will the markets react tomorrow morning?
Yeah, Zaka, what has changed from April? We were at an extreme panic zone. After 2nd April, global markets were in extreme panic. Now we are at qualified unease. If you look at, we have something called option positioning in the markets. That gives you an idea of how much fall are the markets forecasting. It's less than 1% for European markets, for US markets, even in Indian markets. And it's not complacency. It's a qualified unease. One, Trump has moved the date to August 1st, even though they are saying we will issue letters, and they are saying, no, we are not postponing, but it's actually postponed by 22 days to 1st August. Second, they famously said on 9th April that 150 countries are in line for a negotiated settlement, and we are looking at 90 deals in 90 days. They have been able to do 2.5. One with UK, 0.75 with Vietnam, 0.75 with China. So 2.5 deals out of 90 is all they've done. Third, for India, India is holding its horses, as are the European Union, Japan, South Korea. All the trading partners are seeing that the Chinese method of negotiating in a tough manner is much better than the UK, where UK tried to appease Trump, but till now they're not very clear on the contours of their policy, and they're not getting relief on steel or aluminum, or even on their automobiles.
But tell me, Mr. Bagga, for India, the sort of red line seems to be agricultural products, certain products like soybean and corn, etc. We've discussed in great detail about why those are red lines for India. And India is hoping that, if it came down to that, if India had to make some concessions there, at least Trump would concede on steel and aluminium. What has gone wrong with that bargain?
I don't think it will happen. India cannot afford it, and as you said, enough reasons for that. But the basic reason it will kill your farm economy because the US goods will come at 50% off at a very high quality. Some will be genetically modified, but they have huge hidden subsidies which we can't counter. So it will kill your agrarian economy. It's political suicide. It will not happen. Second is on steel, Zaka, where they have an FTA with Australia for multiple years. They are levying 25% on steel, 50% on aluminium. Even on UK, where they have signed a deal, a so-called deal, it's still 25%, 50%. With Canada, where they had an old agreement which Trump had signed in 2020 and has gone back on, he's charging 50% on aluminium on Canadian smelters. So it's not coming. It won't happen. It will be largely a 10% tariff for the entire world with sectoral carve-outs, steel, aluminium, automobile parts. Japan, for example, is holding out for relief on automobile parts and auto because that's 8% of their GDP, their exports of cars into the US. And Trump is not ready to move on that. And Japan has an election this year. So they've just postponed the talking. They have been very polite, but they have been very tough.
All right, Mr. Bagga, we'll leave it to that. Trump, of course, now threatening another 10% extra on BRICS countries. But we'll see. We'll know, like I said, in the next few hours, whether or not there is a deal, whether there is no deal. And if there is no deal, as Mr. Bagga was saying, the markets seem to have sort of factored that in. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.